Nationalism. It's a word we hear all the time, right? In the news, in history class, and these really fiery political speeches. And it's a force that can literally build a country from the ground up, or it can tear an entire empire apart. So what does it actually mean? Well, it turns out there is no single, easy answer. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. Just take a look at these two flags. On the right, you've got the flag of Spain. And on the left, the Senyera, the flag of Catalonia. Now, for millions of people, both of these are powerful symbols of pride and identity. But they also represent this really deep, really bitter conflict over which nation actually deserves to be a state. This one image just perfectly captures the whole paradox of nationalism. And that brings us to the big question we're tackling in this explainer. Is nationalism a force for unity, something that brings people together? Or is it fundamentally a driver of division, something that tears people apart? Well, the surprising and, let's be honest, kind of confusing answer is, it's both. To really get our heads around that paradox, we've got to break it down into its most basic parts. Before we can even talk about nationalism, we first have to get on the same page about what a nation is. So, a nation isn't just a country on a map. It's more of a community, a group of people who feel like they belong together. And that shared identity, it can be built on all sorts of things. A common language, a shared culture, the same values, or a collective history of triumphs and struggles. At its core, it's a feeling. It's that sense of. So, what happens when that feeling of us gets political? Well, that's when you get the principle of self-determination. And this is a really powerful idea. It's the belief that every nation, every one of those us groups, has the right to govern itself, to create its own state, to be the master of its own destiny. But this is exactly where the whole concept starts to splinter. See, believing in your nation is one thing, but getting everyone to agree on what that nation should look like or how it should act, that's a whole other ballgame. Nationalism isn't one single idea. It's this huge, sprawling spectrum of competing ideas. Honestly, the best way to visualize all this is to think of nationalism as a kind of sliding scale. On one end, you have forms that are rational and inclusive. But as you slide all the way to the other end, it gets really irrational and exclusive. This scale is going to be our guide for the rest of this journey. So our map of nationalism has two main directions. First is the nation defined by political values or by its cultural identity. The political or civic version is all about shared ideals, things like liberty, democracy, the rule of law. But the cultural or ethnic version is about a shared heritage, things you're born with, like language and ancestry. And the second direction is who gets to join the club. Inclusive nationalism says pretty much anyone can become part of the nation, as long as they adopt its values. But exclusive nationalism, nope. It says you have to be born into it. It's a closed shop, based on blood and soil. All right, let's start our journey. We're going to begin at the most inclusive and cooperative end of that spectrum. And here we find liberal nationalism. Its core argument is that all nations are equal, and every nation has a right to self-determination. It doesn't view other nations as rivals to be defeated, but as partners to work with. The ultimate goal is a world of independent countries all cooperating peacefully. If you want to see this idea in action, just think about organizations like the European Union or the United Nations. They are the ultimate expression of this kind of thinking, nations working together for the common good, trying to create a more peaceful and prosperous world for everybody. Okay, let's slide a little further down the scale and look at conservative nationalism. This version is a bit less focused on the big wide world and more on what's happening at home. Its main goal is to keep society stable and unified by rallying people around shared traditions, institutions, and a good old-fashioned sense of national pride. You know, a fascinating example of this used to be the so-called cricket test in Britain. The idea was that you could tell if an immigrant was truly loyal by seeing if they cheered for the English cricket team. Today, that's kind of evolved into things like citizenship tests, where you have to prove you know the national culture and history. It's all about assimilation into one shared identity. Now, let's look at a type of nationalism that was born out of pure struggle, anti-colonial nationalism. This is the nationalism of people who have been oppressed, who are fighting to throw off the shackles of empire. It's a powerful fight for freedom, for independence, and for the right to reclaim a national identity that was stamped out by foreign rulers. I mean, just look at this cartoon from the 1880s. It shows European leaders literally carving up the continent of Africa like it's a cake, just to serve their own interests. They drew lines on a map that completely ignored the people and cultures that were already there. Anti-colonial nationalism was the fierce and totally necessary response to that kind of imperial arrogance. And now, we arrive at the far dark end of our spectrum, Expansionist nationalism. This is an aggressive, militaristic, and ugly ideology that's built on a feeling of superiority. It's the belief that one nation is just inherently better than all the others, and because of that, it has the right, or maybe even the duty, to dominate them.
This ideology, it really thrives on fear. It paints other nations not as potential partners, but as existential threats. It creates this constant us versus them worldview, where conflict isn't just possible, it's inevitable. And conquest becomes the ultimate proof of national greatness. This is the nationalism that leads to war.
Wow. Okay, so we've traveled all the way from the cooperative ideals of the EU to the aggressive chauvinism that builds empires. So let's circle all the way back to our original question and see what we've learned.
So what's the bottom line? First, nationalism is not just one thing. It's a whole spectrum of ideas. And because of that, it can be an incredible force for liberation and cooperation. But it can also fuel the absolute worst division and aggression. It's a powerful tool, and whether it's used for good or for ill, well, that depends entirely on whose hands it's in and what they're trying to achieve with it.
Which leaves us with a final, really crucial question for our time. In a world like ours, where people, ideas, and money cross borders more easily than ever before, what does it even mean to belong to a nation? When we see conflicts like the one between Catalan and Spanish identity, we have to ask ourselves, is nationalism a relic of the past, or is it a force that's going to define our future? That's something for all of us to think about.